The dust cloud rose behind him like a ghost as Xavier Kane rode into Georgetown, Colorado, with nothing but the horse beneath him, the clothes on his back, and a hunger that felt like it might swallow him whole. It was August of 1876, and the summer sun beat down on the mining town with relentless fury, turning the main street into a shimmering mirage of heat and desperation. Xavier had been riding for 3 days straight, ever since the cattle drive had gone sideways near Denver, and the boss had refused to pay the drovers what they were owed. Most of the men had taken their anger out in fists and whiskey, but Xavier had simply mounted his horse and ridden away, unwilling to waste what little energy he had left on a fight that would not fill his belly or line his empty pockets. The town sprawled before him, buildings of weathered wood and fresh lumber standing side by side, evidence of Georgetown's rapid growth as silver brought fortune seekers from every corner of the country. Xavier guided his horse down the main thoroughfare, past the assay office and the general store, past saloons with names like the Silver Queen and the Prospector's Rest. His stomach growled audibly, reminding him that he had not eaten since yesterday morning, and even that had been nothing more than hardtack and creek water. He pulled his horse to a stop outside a restaurant with a hand-painted sign that read Zelda's Kitchen. Through the window, he could see white tablecloths and actual china plates, the kind of establishment that would never let a broke cowboy through its doors. But Xavier was past the point of pride. He dismounted, tied his horse to the hitching post, and walked up the 3 steps to the entrance, each footfall heavy with the weight of his exhaustion. The door opened before he could reach for the handle, and a woman stepped out carrying a crate of empty bottles. She nearly collided with him, and Xavier reached out instinctively to steady both her and the crate. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop its relentless turning. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun that still managed to be elegant, and eyes the color of warm honey. Flour dusted her blue dress, and there was a smudge of something that might have been jam on her left cheek. She was beautiful in the way that real things are beautiful, without artifice or pretense. "Careful," Xavier said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You are the one who should be careful," she replied, but there was no heat in her words. She studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away and hold her gaze at the same time. "You look like you have not eaten in a week." 3 days, Xavier corrected, then wondered why he was being honest. "I was hoping I might work for a meal." "I can chop wood, haul water, fix anything that needs fixing." She set the crate down on the porch and crossed her arms, still looking at him with those honey-colored eyes. "What is your name?" "Xavier Kane, madam." "Zelda Novak," she said. "This is my restaurant." "When was the last time you slept in an actual bed?" The question caught him off guard. "I do not rightly remember." Zelda looked past him at his horse, which stood with its head hanging low, as tired as its master. Then she looked back at Xavier, and something in her expression shifted, softened. "My cook quit 2 days ago. Ran off to try his hand at prospecting like half the fools in this town. I need someone who can handle the heavy work in the kitchen, keep the wood stove going, haul supplies from the general store. The pay is not much, but it comes with 3 meals a day and a room above the restaurant." Xavier felt something catch in his chest, a sensation he barely recognized as hope. "Madam, I do not know how to thank you. You can thank me by not calling me madam. My name is Zelda." She picked up the crate again. "There is a bathhouse 2 doors down. Go get yourself cleaned up, and when you come back, I will have food waiting. After you eat, I will show you your room and tell you what needs doing." Xavier stood there for a moment, unable to move, unable to process this sudden turn of fortune. Zelda looked back at him from the doorway, one eyebrow raised. "Well, are you staying or not?" "Yes," Xavier said, the word coming out with more force than he intended. "Yes, I am staying." Zelda smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face, and Xavier felt something shift deep in his chest, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. "Good. Now go wash up. You smell like 3 days on the trail." The bathhouse cost him the last 2 bits in his pocket, but it was worth it to scrub away the accumulated grime and dust. The attendant even provided him with a straight razor, and Xavier shaved carefully, watching in the mirror as a face he barely recognized emerged from beneath the stubble. He was 26 years old, but the past few years had worn lines around his eyes and mouth that made him look older. Still, with the dirt gone and his dark hair combed back, he looked almost respectable. When he returned to the restaurant, the lunch rush was in full swing. Xavier could see Zelda through the window, moving between tables with practiced grace, balancing plates and pouring coffee with the ease of someone who had been doing this work for years. He hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain, but she caught his eye and gestured for him to come inside. The smell that hit him when he entered was almost overwhelming in its richness. Fresh bread, roasting meat, coffee, something sweet that might have been apple pie. His stomach cramped with longing. Zelda appeared at his elbow and guided him toward the kitchen in the back. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a small table in the corner of the kitchen. "I will bring you food." Xavier sat, feeling awkward and out of place in the bustling kitchen. A young girl who could not have been more than 16 was washing dishes at a large sink, and she gave him a curious look before returning to her work. Zelda reappeared with a plate piled high with beef stew, fresh bread, butter, and a slice of apple pie that made Xavier's mouth water just looking at it. "Eat slowly," Zelda warned. "If your stomach is empty, you will make yourself sick." It was the hardest thing Xavier had ever done, forcing himself to eat slowly when every fiber of his being wanted to wolf down the food in front of him. The stew was rich and flavorful, the beef tender, the vegetables cooked to perfection. The bread was still warm from the oven, and when he spread butter on it, the butter melted immediately. He had eaten in cattle camps and trail stops across 3 territories, but he had never tasted anything as good as this simple meal. Zelda returned periodically to check on him, always with a word or a glance, and Xavier found himself watching her when she was not looking. She moved with confidence and purpose, never wasting emotion, and he could see that her staff respected her. The young dishwasher jumped to obey whenever Zelda asked for something, and through the window to the dining room, Xavier could see that the customers were treated with genuine warmth. When he had finished eating, Zelda brought him a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. "Better." "Much better, thank you. That was the best meal I have had in longer than I can remember." "That is what people say. That is why this place stays busy." She paused, wrapping her hands around her own coffee cup. "The room upstairs is small, but it is clean. I require that you keep it that way." "Work starts at 4 in the morning. We serve breakfast from 5 to 8, lunch from noon to 3, dinner from 6 to 9. Between meals there are always supplies to fetch, repairs to make, wood to chop. The previous cook was lazy and let things pile up." "I am not afraid of hard work," Xavier said. "I can see that." Zelda's honey-colored eyes studied him again with that same intensity. "Why are you broke, Xavier Kane? You do not have the look of a drifter or a drunk. What happened?" Xavier set down his coffee cup and met her gaze. "I was working a cattle drive. The trail boss was a cheat who tried to short us our pay. Some of the other drovers wanted to fight about it, but I have been in enough fights to know that the man with nothing always loses, so I rode away. That took more courage than staying and fighting." Or less, I am not sure which. Zelda smiled slightly. I think more. It is easy to throw a punch. It is harder to walk away and start over. She stood up, smoothing her apron. Come on, I will show you your room and then you can start by bringing in firewood. The woodpile out back needs to be stocked before the dinner rush. The room above the restaurant was indeed small, but it was clean and furnished with a real bed, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small window that looked out over the main street. After weeks of sleeping on the ground with his saddle for a pillow, it seemed like a palace. This is more than generous, Xavier said. It is practical. I need someone reliable, and people work better when they are fed and rested. Zelda pointed to a set of clean work clothes folded on the bed. These belonged to the previous cook. He was about your size. You can have them. Before Xavier could thank her again, she was gone, her footsteps quick on the stairs. He stood in the small room for a moment, letting the reality of his changed circumstances sink in. This morning, he had been riding into town with nothing, no prospects, no plan beyond not starving. Now he had a job, a room, and a full stomach. And he had met Zelda Novak, who looked at him like he was a person instead of just another drifter. Xavier changed into the work clothes and headed downstairs to start on the firewood. The woodpile behind the restaurant was indeed in sorry shape, scattered and disorganized. He found an axe in the shed and spent the next 2 hours splitting logs and stacking them neatly, losing himself in the rhythm of the work. It felt good to do something productive, to feel his muscles working toward a purpose. As he worked, he became aware of the sounds of the restaurant, the murmur of conversation from the dining room, the clatter of dishes, Zelda's voice giving instructions or greeting customers. He learned the rhythm of the place without consciously trying, the ebb and flow of busy periods and quiet moments. When the woodpile was fully stocked, Xavier returned to the kitchen to ask what else needed doing. Zelda handed him a list written in neat, precise handwriting. Supplies to fetch from the general store. Tell Mr. Patterson to put it on my account. The general store was busy with miners and townspeople, but the proprietor, a round-faced man with wire-rimmed spectacles, filled Xavier's order efficiently when he heard it was for Zelda. That woman makes the best pie in Georgetown, Mr. Patterson said as he wrapped up a sack of flour. Probably the best pie in all of Colorado. You working for her now? Yes, sir. Well, you tell her I will be by for dinner tonight. Friday means chicken and dumplings, and I have been looking forward to it all week. Xavier loaded the supplies into a wheelbarrow that Zelda apparently kept behind the store for this purpose, and made his way back to the restaurant. It took 3 trips to get everything, and by the time he was finished, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. The dinner rush started promptly at 6, and Xavier found himself swept up in controlled chaos. His job was to keep the wood stove burning at the right temperature, wash the pots and pans as they came off the stove, and do anything else that Zelda or her servers needed. He worked alongside the young dishwasher, whose name he learned was Emily, and she chattered away about the customers and the town gossip while they worked. Zelda cooked everything herself, moving between pots and pans with the same grace she had shown in the dining room. Xavier watched her when he could, fascinated by the way she seemed to know exactly when something was done, exactly how much salt or pepper to add, exactly when to pull bread from the oven, so it came out perfect every time. Stop staring and start washing, Zelda said without looking up from the chicken she was frying, but there was amusement in her voice. Xavier felt heat rise in his face and turned back to the sink, plunging his hands into the hot, soapy water. Emily giggled beside him but said nothing. The dinner rush did not end until nearly 10, and by then, Xavier was exhausted in a way that was different from the bone-deep weariness of the trail. This was a good tired, the kind that came from honest work and a full stomach. As the last customers left, Zelda emerged from the kitchen and flipped the sign on the door to closed. "Emily, you can go home," she said. "Xavier, sit down. We need to talk about your wages." Xavier sat at one of the tables while Zelda counted out the day's receipts. Her fingers moved quickly, sorting coins and bills into neat stacks. When she was finished, she looked up at him. "$20 a month plus room and board," she said. "That is what I paid the last cook, and that is what I will pay you. Work starts at 4 in the morning, but I will not expect you there that early until Monday. Tomorrow you can sleep until 6. Do we have an agreement?" "Yes," Xavier said, "we have an agreement." Zelda extended her hand and Xavier shook it, feeling the strength in her grip and the roughness of her palm. These were working hands just like his own. "Good. Now go upstairs and sleep. You look like you are about to fall over." Xavier did not need to be told twice. He climbed the stairs to his small room, shed his boots and shirt, and collapsed onto the bed. The mattress was stuffed with real feathers, the blankets were clean and warm, and for the first time in weeks, he felt safe. His last conscious thought before sleep claimed him was of honey-colored eyes and a smile that transformed a flour-dusted face. The next morning, Xavier woke to sunlight streaming through his window and the sound of activity below. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs, where he found Zelda already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. "Good morning," she said. "There is coffee on the stove and biscuits in the warmer. Help yourself." Xavier poured himself a cup of coffee and took 2 biscuits, eating standing up while he looked around the kitchen, trying to figure out what needed doing. Zelda watched him with what might have been approval. "You are eager," she said. "I like that. But this morning I want you to do something else. Take your horse to the livery stable and arrange for boarding. I will cover the cost. A cowboy without a horse is not much of a cowboy. I cannot let you pay for that. You can and you will. Consider it an investment. I will need you to run errands that require a horse, and I cannot have you borrowing someone else's animal every time." She shaped the dough into a round loaf and set it aside to rise. "After that, walk around town. Get to know Georgetown. Learn where things are. You cannot help me if you do not know your way around." Xavier opened his mouth to argue about the horse boarding, then closed it again. Zelda had a determined set to her jaw that suggested she did not lose arguments often. "Thank you," he said instead. "You can thank me by being reliable. That is all I ask." The livery stable was at the far end of town, a large barn that smelled of horses and hay and leather. The owner, a grizzled man named Frank who looked to be in his 60s, agreed to board Xavier's horse for $1 a week. "Zelda Novak's new cook, are you?" Frank asked as he led the horse into a stall. "You are the 3rd one this year. The other 2 did not last." "Why not?" One ran off to prospect. The other one thought because he worked for Zelda, he could take liberties. She threw him out faster than you can spit. Frank gave Xavier a hard look. "I will give you some advice, son. Zelda Novak is a good woman, and this town has a lot of respect for her. Any man who treats her poorly will have the whole town to answer to." "Understood, understood," Xavier said, though he was puzzled by the warning. "I have no intention of treating her poorly. She gave me a job when I had nothing." Frank's expression softened slightly. "All right then. Your horse will be well cared for. Come by and visit him whenever you want." Xavier spent the rest of the morning exploring Georgetown. The town was larger than he had realized, with several thousand residents drawn by the silver mines that honeycombed the surrounding mountains. There were the usual establishments of any mining town: saloons, gambling halls, brothels, but there were also churches, schools, a library, and even an opera house. Georgetown was trying to become civilized, to be more than just another boom town that would disappear when the silver ran out. He learned where the bank was, where the doctor kept his office, where the sheriff stayed when he was not making his rounds. He noted the good streets and the bad ones, the places where miners gathered to drink and the places where families shopped. All the while, he thought about Zelda's restaurant at the heart of it all, a place where miners and merchants, families and lone travelers all came to eat. When he returned to the restaurant around noon, the lunch service was already underway. Xavier slipped into the kitchen through the back door and immediately started helping Emily with the dishes. Zelda shot him a quick smile of approval before turning back to her cooking. Over the following days, Xavier settled into the rhythm of the restaurant. He learned that Zelda opened the place 3 years ago with money she had saved from working as a cook in Denver. She had come to Georgetown alone, a young woman with more ambition than sense, as she put it, and had built the business through sheer determination and excellent food. He learned that she woke at 3 every morning to start the bread and prepare for breakfast service. He learned that she made all her pie crusts with lard and ice water, that she bought her beef from a rancher named Tom, who made deliveries every Tuesday, that she changed her menu seasonally to take advantage of whatever was freshest and most affordable. He learned that she had a quick temper when things went wrong, but was equally quick to forgive. He learned that she was generous with her staff, but expected perfection in return. He learned that she sang while she cooked, usually songs in a language he did not recognize, and when he finally worked up the courage to ask, she told him it was Czech, the language her parents had spoken when they immigrated to America. "They died when I was 16, she told him one evening as they were cleaning up after dinner service. "Cholera. After that, I had to make my own way in the world." "I am sorry," Xavier said, and he meant it. Zelda shrugged, but he could see the old pain in her eyes. "That is life. You lose people, you keep going. What about you? Where is your family?" "My mother died when I was young. My father was a drunk who beat me until I was big enough to hit back. I left home when I was 15 and have been working cattle ever since." "So we are both orphans," Zelda said. "Both making our own way." "I guess we are." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. They were both survivors, both fighters, both people who had learned early that the world would not give them anything they did not earn. As the weeks passed, Xavier found himself falling into a pattern that felt almost like having a life instead of just an existence. He woke at 4 and started the fires, prepared the kitchen for Zelda's arrival. They worked side by side through breakfast. Then he would run errands or do repairs during the mid-morning lull. Lunch service, more errands, then prep work for dinner. After dinner, they cleaned up together, talking about the day, about the customers, about nothing and everything. He found himself learning to anticipate what she needed before she asked. He could tell by the set of her shoulders when she was tired, by the line between her eyebrows when something was worrying her, by the brightness of her eyes when she was happy. And she seemed to be learning him too, knowing when he needed to work through something in his head versus when he needed conversation, knowing when his old injuries from years of cowboy work were aching and making sure he sat down to rest. It was not romantic exactly, but it was intimate in a way that Xavier had never experienced. They were partners in the daily work of keeping the restaurant running, and that partnership created a bond that he was not sure how to name. One evening in late September, after they had cleaned up from dinner and Emily had gone home, Zelda poured 2 glasses of wine and brought them to where Xavier was sitting at the kitchen table, mending a broken chair leg. "We should celebrate," she said, handing him a glass. "Celebrate what?" You have been here 6 weeks. That is longer than any cook I have hired has lasted. I think you might actually stay." Xavier took the wine, their fingers brushing as she handed him the glass. "I am not planning on going anywhere." "Good." Zelda sat down across from him and raised her glass. "To staying. To staying," Xavier echoed, and they drank. The wine was sweet and strong, and it loosened something in Xavier's chest that had been tight for longer than he could remember. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "Why did you give me a job that day? You did not know me." "I could have been anyone." Zelda was quiet for a moment, turning her glass in her hands. "I saw something in you," she finally said. "You were exhausted and hungry, but you were not begging. You were not drunk. You just wanted to work for a meal. That told me what kind of man you are." She looked up at him, and in the lamplight her eyes seemed to glow. "I have good instincts about people, and my instincts told me you were worth taking a chance on." "I am glad you did," Xavier said, his voice low. "This is the first place that has felt like home since I left my father's house." "It is home," Zelda said, "for both of us." They sat in comfortable silence, finishing their wine. Outside, the sounds of Georgetown on a Saturday night filtered through the walls, music from the saloons, voices raised in laughter or argument, the distant whistle of a train. Inside, the kitchen was warm and peaceful, lit by the soft glow of the oil lamps. When Xavier finally stood to go upstairs, Zelda stood too. For a moment, they stood close enough that he could smell the flour and cinnamon that always seemed to cling to her hair, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her honey-colored eyes. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "Good night, Xavier," she said softly. "Good night, Zelda." He forced himself to turn and walk up the stairs, every step an effort of will. In his small room, he sat on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands, trying to calm the storm of feelings that threatened to overwhelm him. He was falling in love with Zelda Novak. He had probably been falling in love with her since that first moment on the porch when she had looked at him like he mattered. But what could he offer her? He was still just a broke cowboy who happened to be working in her kitchen. She owned a successful business. She had built something real and lasting, while he had spent his whole life drifting from one job to another. What did he have that could possibly interest a woman like her? The next day was Sunday, and the restaurant was closed. Zelda had mentioned that she usually spent Sundays doing paperwork, ordering supplies, and planning the week's menu. Xavier had assumed he would have the day off, but when he came downstairs in the morning, he found Zelda in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and a worried expression. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately. Zelda looked up at him. "The oven is not heating properly. I think there is something wrong with the flue. I need it working by tomorrow or I will not be able to bake bread." "Let me look at it." Xavier spent the next hour examining the wood stove, taking apart the flue and checking the chimney. He found a bird's nest that had fallen down and was blocking part of the airflow. It took another hour to clear it out completely and reassemble everything, but when he was done, the stove was heating evenly again. "You are a miracle worker," Zelda said, watching the temperature gauge climb to where it needed to be. "Tom, the cook before you, would have just thrown up his hands and said it was broken beyond repair. It is not that complicated if you know what you are looking for. My father, for all his faults, was good with his hands. He taught me how to fix things before he taught me much else." Zelda was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You are full of surprises, Xavier Kane. Is that a good thing?" "It is a very good thing." Later that afternoon, Zelda convinced Xavier to take a walk with her. "I spend all week cooked in that kitchen," she said. "On Sundays, I need air and space, or I will go crazy." They walked up into the hills above Georgetown, following a trail that wound between pine trees and outcroppings of granite. The aspen trees were beginning to turn gold, painting the mountainsides with splashes of brilliant color. The air was crisp and clean, and Xavier could see why Zelda treasured these Sunday walks. "Tell me about the cattle drives," Zelda said as they walked. "What was that life like?" "Hard," Xavier said honestly. "You wake up before dawn and work until after dark. You eat dust all day, sleep on the ground all night. The cattle spook at shadows, the rivers are dangerous, the weather is unpredictable. And at the end of months of work, if you are lucky, you get paid enough to get drunk and maybe see a dentist. But you did it for years. It was what I knew. After I left home, a ranch foreman took pity on me and taught me the work. I was good at it, good enough that I always found employment." He paused, then added, "But I never liked it, not really. It was just survival. And now I am learning that survival and living are not the same thing." Zelda stopped walking and turned to face him. They were on a ridge that overlooked Georgetown, the town spread out below them in neat lines of buildings and streets. The restaurant was visible from here, a solid structure in the heart of everything. "I am glad you stayed," Zelda said. "I know I said that last night, but I mean it. These past weeks have been the easiest this business has run since I opened it. You work hard, you do not complain, and you actually seem to care about getting things right. That means more to me than you know." "It is not hard to care about something when you are working alongside someone who cares so much herself," Xavier said. "You love that restaurant. It shows in everything you do." "It is all I have," Zelda said simply. "It is my whole life, building it, keeping it going, that gives me purpose." She looked away, out over the town. "Sometimes I wonder if that is enough." Xavier wanted to tell her that she deserved more, that she deserved someone to share her life with, that she deserved to be loved the way her food and her restaurant were loved. But the words stuck in his throat, held back by fear and uncertainty. Instead, he said, "You have built something remarkable. There is no shame in being proud of that." "Thank you," Zelda said, and she smiled at him with such warmth that Xavier felt his heart twist in his chest. They walked back to town in comfortable silence, and that night, Xavier lay in his bed thinking about Zelda's words. "It is all I have. It is my whole life." He understood that feeling better than anyone. Work had been his whole life too, the only thing he had ever been able to count on. But working in the restaurant, being around Zelda, had shown him that there could be more. That maybe he could build something too, could create a life that was about more than just surviving from one day to the next. October arrived with cold nights and bright, clear days. The aspen leaves reached their peak of golden beauty, and then began to fall, carpeting the mountains in a rustling blanket. Business at the restaurant stayed steady, with miners coming down from the high country before the snows closed the passes, stocking up on good meals before the long winter ahead. Xavier had been working at the restaurant for 3 months, and he had begun to feel less like an employee and more like a partner. Zelda consulted him on decisions about supplies and repairs. She asked his opinion on new dishes she was trying. She trusted him to handle lunch service on the rare occasions when she needed to run an errand, which he knew was a significant show of faith. And there were moments, small moments, when something would pass between them that felt like more than friendship or partnership. A hand that lingered too long when passing a plate. Eyes that met across the kitchen and held for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Conversations that stretched late into the evening, the two of them sitting at the kitchen table long after Emily had gone home and the town had grown quiet. Xavier was terrified to name what he was feeling, even to himself. Love seemed too big a word, too dangerous. But whatever it was growing stronger every day, until he found it hard to imagine a life that did not include Zelda's presence, her voice, her laughter, the way she hummed while she cooked. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that transformed Georgetown into a winter wonderland. Xavier woke to see everything covered in white, and he hurried downstairs to make sure the paths were cleared before breakfast service. Zelda met him in the kitchen, bundled in a heavy shawl, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Winter comes early in the mountains," she said. "By December, we will have snow up to the windowsills. I hope you are not planning on leaving before spring, because once the pass is close, you will be trapped here until the thaw." "I told you I am not planning on leaving at all," Xavier said. "I know, but saying it and meaning it are different things. Winter in Georgetown can be hard. Some people cannot handle the isolation." "I am not some people," Zelda smiled. "No, you are not." As she predicted, the snow came in earnest as November progressed. Some days, it snowed so hard that they could barely see across the street, and the drifts piled up against the buildings until they reached the second-story windows. But the restaurant stayed open, serving as a gathering place for townspeople who were going stir-crazy from being cooped up indoors. Xavier learned how to navigate Georgetown in the snow, how to judge which streets were passable and which had drifted shut. He learned how to keep the paths clear, how to make sure the wood stove never went out, how to stock enough supplies that they would not run short if a storm kept the delivery wagons from getting through. And through it all, he and Zelda worked together, their partnership deepening into something that felt as essential as breathing. They developed a wordless communication, able to coordinate complex meals without needing to speak. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, knew when to give space and when to offer comfort. One evening in mid-November, a week before Thanksgiving, they were working on the menu for the holiday meal when Zelda set down her pen and looked at Xavier with unusual seriousness. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Of course." "Have you ever been in love?" The question caught Xavier off guard. "No," he said after a moment. "I have known women, but I was always moving from place to place. There was never time for anything real." "You want that?" "Something real?" Xavier's heart was pounding. "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "I did not know I wanted it until recently, but yes." Zelda nodded slowly, still watching him with those honey-colored eyes. "I was married once," she said, "back in Denver before I moved here. He was a good man, but he was killed in a mining accident 3 weeks after our wedding. I thought I would never want to try again, never want to risk that kind of pain." "Zelda," Xavier said, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I thought I would just focus on my work, on building something that could not be taken away from me, and for 3 years that was enough. But then you rode into town with nothing, and I offered you a job without knowing why, and everything changed." She took a breath. "I am not good at this. At talking about feelings. I am much better with flour and butter and sugar, things I can measure and control. But I need you to know that you matter to me, that you have become important in a way that scares me." Xavier stood up, unable to sit still any longer, and crossed to where Zelda was sitting. He knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. "You scare me too," he said. "I have never felt like this about anyone. I do not know what I am doing or how to do it right. But I know that when I am with you, I am happier than I have ever been. I know that the thought of losing this, of losing you, makes me feel like I cannot breathe." Zelda reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. "I told you to stay and I would give you everything. I meant it as a job offer, nothing more. But somewhere along the way, I realized I wanted to give you everything, actually everything." Xavier covered her hand with his own, holding it against his face. "You already have given me everything. Purpose, home, a reason to wake up in the morning that is not just about survival. You gave me that the day I met you." "Xavier," Zelda whispered, and then he was kissing her, or she was kissing him. He was not sure who moved first. All he knew was that her lips were soft and warm, that she tasted like the cinnamon she had been using to make apple pie, that kissing her felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. When they finally pulled apart, Zelda was smiling, really smiling in a way that transformed her entire face into something radiant. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," she admitted. "So have I just did not think I had the right." "You have every right, I am giving you that right." She stood up, pulling him to his feet. "We should probably talk about what this means, about where we go from here." "Where do you want to go?" "I want you in my life. Not just as an employee, but as a partner in every sense. I want to build something together, not just the restaurant, but a life. A real life." She paused, then added with characteristic honesty, "And eventually I want you in my bed, though I think we should wait on that until we are properly courted and married. I do not need any more gossip than this town already generates." Xavier laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Courted and married, I can work with that." Then the full meaning of her words sank in. "Married. Eventually. If that is what you want too, I know it is fast, but Xavier, I am 25 years old. I know what I want and I want you. But we can take our time getting there." "I want that too," Xavier said, marveling at how easy it was to say the words. "I want all of it. You, marriage, a life together, everything." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. When they parted, Zelda laughed softly. "We should probably finish planning the Thanksgiving menu. We have 50 people coming." "50 people can wait 5 more minutes," Xavier said, and he kissed her again, feeling her melt against him, her arms wrapping around his neck. The next few weeks were the happiest of Xavier's life. They did not make a formal announcement, but Georgetown was a small town and people noticed. They noticed the way Xavier and Zelda looked at each other. They noticed the way they moved in perfect synchronization in the kitchen. They noticed that Xavier now wore a smile that seemed permanently fixed to his face. Frank at the livery stable gave Xavier a knowing look when he came to check on his horse. "Told you she was a good woman," Frank said. "You treat her right, you hear?" "I intend to," Xavier replied. Mr. Patterson at the general store clapped him on the shoulder when Xavier came to pick up supplies. "About time someone made an honest woman of Zelda Novak. She has been alone too long." Even Emily, the young dishwasher, giggled when she caught them holding hands in the kitchen. "I knew it," she said triumphantly. "I told my mother weeks ago that you two were in love." Thanksgiving came, and they served a feast that people would talk about for months. Turkey with cornbread stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, cranberry sauce, roasted vegetables, fresh rolls, and pies in every flavor Zelda could think of. The restaurant was packed from noon until 8 at night, and Xavier worked harder than he ever had, but he was grinning the whole time. When the last customer left and they were cleaning up, Zelda pulled Xavier aside. "I got you something," she said, and she pressed a small package wrapped in brown paper into his hands. "What is this? Open it and see." Xavier unwrapped the paper carefully and found himself holding a new shirt, made from good quality fabric in a deep blue color. "Zelda, this is too much." "It is not too much. You have been wearing the same 3 shirts since you got here. I wanted you to have something nice." She paused, then added shyly, "I made it myself. I hope it fits." Xavier tried on the shirt and found that it fit perfectly, as if it had been tailored for him. "It is perfect," he said. "Thank you. You are welcome. Now I have something else to tell you. I have been thinking, and I want to make you a partner in the restaurant. Not just someone who works here, but an actual owner with a stake in the business. We can go to the lawyer next week and draw up the papers." "Zelda, I cannot let you do that. I have not earned it." "You have earned it every single day since you got here. This restaurant runs better with you than it ever did before. You care about it as much as I do. That makes you a partner whether there are papers saying so or not. I just want to make it official." Xavier pulled her close, overwhelmed by her generosity and by how much his life had changed in just 4 months. "I do not know what I did to deserve you. You rode into town with nothing and chose to stay," Zelda said simply. "That was enough." December brought colder temperatures and heavier snow, but inside the restaurant, everything was warm and bright. Xavier and Zelda worked on plans to expand the menu in the spring, to add outdoor seating for the summer months, to maybe hire another cook so Zelda would not have to work quite so hard. They talked about the future constantly now, painting pictures of the life they would build together. Zelda wanted to eventually open a second restaurant, maybe in Denver or Colorado Springs. Xavier wanted to buy some land outside of town, raise a few head of cattle, grow their own vegetables. They dreamed together, their individual dreams intertwining into something bigger and more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. On Christmas Eve, Xavier borrowed Frank's wagon and drove Zelda up into the mountains to cut down a small pine tree for the restaurant. It was a clear, cold night, and the stars blazed overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. They found the perfect tree, a 6-foot pine that was full and symmetrical, and Xavier cut it down while Zelda held the lantern. As they were loading the tree into the wagon, Xavier turned to Zelda. "I have something to say, and I need to say it before I lose my nerve." "What is it?" "I love you. I have been in love with you probably since that first day, but I know it for certain now. You are everything I never knew I needed. You gave me a home when I had nothing, but more than that, you gave me a reason to want to be a better man. You make me want to build something lasting, something real. I love you, Zelda Novak, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Zelda's eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I love you too, Xavier Kane. I loved you when I saw you standing on my porch, hungry and tired but still proud. I loved you when you fixed the oven and cleared the snow and learned to make my coffee exactly how I like it. I loved you when you started looking at me like I was something precious. I love you now, and I will love you for the rest of my days." Xavier kissed her there in the snowy forest, under the stars, with the scent of pine all around them and the sound of the wind in the trees. It was the most perfect moment of his life. They decorated the tree together when they got back to the restaurant, hanging paper ornaments that Emily had made and strings of cranberries that Zelda had prepared. Xavier placed a star made of tin at the very top, and they stood back to admire their work. "Our first Christmas together," Zelda said, leaning against Xavier's side. "The first of many," Xavier replied, wrapping his arm around her. On Christmas Day, they served dinner to anyone in Georgetown who did not have family to spend the holiday with. Miners, drifters, widows, and widowers all came to the restaurant, and Zelda made sure everyone left with a full stomach and a slice of pie. Xavier worked beside her, amazed as always by her generosity and her open heart. That night, after everyone had gone and they were sitting by the Christmas tree with cups of hot cider, Xavier pulled a small box from his pocket. His hands were shaking as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring. "I know we said we would take our time," Xavier said, "but I also know what I want and I do not want to wait anymore. Zelda Novak, will you marry me?" Zelda looked at the ring, then at Xavier, and her smile was brighter than all the stars they had seen the night before. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, just like everything else about them. They kissed and it felt like sealing a promise, like making a vow that would last forever. "When?" Zelda asked when they finally pulled apart. "Whenever you want." "Tomorrow, if you would have me." Zelda laughed. "Let us give it at least a week. I want a proper dress and we need to make arrangements with the minister, and we should have a celebration here at the restaurant for everyone. A week it is." They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in the small church at the center of Georgetown. Zelda wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had ordered from Denver, and Xavier wore a new suit that Mr. Patterson had helped him pick out. Frank gave Zelda away. Emily was her bridesmaid, and it seemed like half the town crowded into the church to witness the ceremony. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed his bride with all the love and joy and hope he carried in his heart. The church erupted in applause, and as they walked back down the aisle together, Xavier thought about how far he had traveled, both in miles and in spirit, from that day when he had ridden into Georgetown with nothing. They held the reception at the restaurant, which Zelda had closed for the day. There was food and music and dancing, and Xavier discovered that his wife was an excellent dancer, light on her feet and full of laughter. They danced until the sun went down and the oil lamps were lit, until the musicians were tired and the guests began to drift away. Finally, it was just the two of them, standing in the middle of the restaurant that was now truly theirs together. Zelda took Xavier's hand and led him upstairs, not to his small room but to her larger room at the front of the building, the room that was now their room. "Are you nervous?" Zelda asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Terrified," Xavier admitted, "but in a good way, me too." She patted the bed beside her. "Come here." Xavier sat down and Zelda took his face in her hands. "I love you," she said. "I am so glad you stayed. I am glad I stayed too. I am glad you asked me to." They kissed, and it was different from all the kisses before, sweeter and deeper and full of promise. They had all the time in the world now, a lifetime stretching ahead of them, and Xavier intended to savor every moment. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Xavier and Zelda ran the restaurant together, now as true partners in every sense. They moved Xavier's few belongings into Zelda's room and made it theirs, adding small touches that reflected both of their personalities. They talked late into every night, learning each other's histories and dreams, building the foundation of their marriage on honesty and trust. In February, Zelda realized she was pregnant. She told Xavier one morning before breakfast service, her eyes shining with joy and a little fear. "Are you ready to be a father?" Xavier pulled her into his arms, feeling like his heart might burst from happiness. "I am ready for anything as long as you are beside me." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Georgetown watched with approval as Zelda's belly grew. She refused to slow down at first, insisting on doing all her usual work, but by May, Xavier put his foot down and hired another woman to help with the cooking. Zelda protested but secretly seemed relieved. Their son was born in September, during the golden time when the aspens were turning, and the air had just begun to carry the promise of winter. They named him Samuel, after Zelda's father, and from the moment Xavier held the tiny, squalling bundle in his arms, he knew what it meant to truly love without reservation. Zelda recovered quickly, and within a month she was back in the kitchen, though Xavier made sure she had plenty of help. Samuel slept in a cradle near the kitchen stove, soothed by the warmth and the familiar sounds of the restaurant, and grew fat and healthy on his mother's milk. The restaurant continued to thrive. With the addition of another cook, they were able to handle even larger crowds, and Xavier's improvements to the building and operations made everything run more smoothly. They saved their profits and talked about opening that second location in Denver, though they agreed to wait until Samuel was a bit older. When Samuel was 2 years old, Zelda became pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter. They named her Anna after Xavier's mother, the one good memory he had of his childhood. Anna had Zelda's honey-colored eyes and Xavier's dark hair, and from the start, she was a fighter, demanding attention and refusing to be ignored. As the children grew, Xavier taught them both to ride, to work hard, to treat people with respect. Zelda taught them to cook, to read, to appreciate beauty in the world around them. They were raised in the warmth and bustle of the restaurant, learning early what it meant to work together, to build something meaningful. By 1882, 5 years after their marriage, Xavier and Zelda owned not just the original restaurant, but also a second location in Denver that was run by Emily, the former dishwasher who had grown into a capable manager. They had bought a piece of land outside Georgetown where they kept horses and grew vegetables, and where they built a house for their family. The house was not large, but it was comfortable and filled with love. Xavier had built much of it himself, taking pride in every board and nail. There was a big kitchen where Zelda experimented with new recipes, a parlor with a fireplace where they gathered in the evenings, and bedrooms for each of the children upstairs. On summer evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, Samuel and Anna playing in the yard while Xavier and Zelda rocked in chairs they had bought from a local craftsman. These were the moments Xavier treasured most, the quiet times when he could reflect on how much his life had changed. "You ever think about that day?" Zelda asked one evening. "The day you rode into town." "Every day," Xavier said. "I think about how close I came to just riding past Georgetown, to never stopping at all." "I am glad you stopped." "So am I. You told me to stay and you would give me everything. You kept that promise in ways I never could have imagined." Zelda reached over and took his hand. "We gave each other everything. That is what partnership means. That is what love means." Xavier raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, this woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved. "I love you, Zelda Kane." "I love you too, Xavier Kane." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Samuel grew tall and strong, with a mind for business that impressed both his parents. Anna was fierce and independent, determined to make her own way in the world. They welcomed 2 more children, twin boys named Thomas and William, born in 1884, and the house grew louder and more chaotic and more full of love. The restaurants continued to prosper, becoming institutions in both Georgetown and Denver. Xavier and Zelda's reputation for excellent food and fair dealing spread throughout Colorado, and they received offers to expand even further, but they always declined. They had learned that success was not just about growth for its own sake, but about building something sustainable that could support the life they wanted to live. In 1890, Samuel announced that he wanted to go to college in the East to study business and learn about new methods of restaurant management. Xavier and Zelda were sad to see him go, but proud of his ambition. Anna, now 18, took over much of the day-to-day management of the Georgetown restaurant, proving herself to be as capable as her mother. The twins, now 6 years old, were terrors who kept everyone on their toes, but who also brought constant laughter and energy to the household. They were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. On their 13th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Zelda back up into the mountains to the spot where they had cut down that first Christmas tree. The forest was quiet and peaceful, the pine trees swaying gently in the breeze. 13 years, Xavier said. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we just got started." "Both are true," Zelda replied. "We have built a whole life together in these 13 years. But I feel like we are still just beginning, like there is so much more ahead of us." "There is. Another 50 years at least, if I have anything to say about it." Zelda smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "I will hold you to that." They stood there in the forest, holding each other, surrounded by the mountains they had come to love. Xavier thought about the man he had been when he rode into Georgetown, hollow and tired and without hope. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone from another life. He had become someone different, someone better, because Zelda had looked at him and seen potential instead of just another drifter. She had given him a chance and he had taken it, and together they had built something beautiful. "Thank you," Xavier said. "For what?" "For asking me to stay. For seeing something in me worth saving. For loving me." "Thank you for staying," Zelda replied. "For being the partner I needed. For giving me a family and a life beyond just work. For loving me back." They kissed there in the forest, just as they had all those years ago on Christmas Eve, and it felt like renewing their vows, like promising all over again to love and cherish each other for all the days to come. The years rolled on, bringing the joys and sorrows that make up any life. There were hard winters and hot summers, good years and lean years, moments of triumph and moments of heartbreak. But through it all, Xavier and Zelda remained partners, facing everything together. Samuel came home from college with new ideas and a sweetheart he had met in Boston. A smart young woman named Margaret who fit into the family as if she had always been there. They married in 1895, and within a year, Xavier and Zelda were grandparents to a beautiful baby girl named Elizabeth. Anna met a young doctor who came to Georgetown to set up a practice, and after a whirlwind courtship, they married in 1896. She continued to run the restaurant even after her marriage, proving that a woman could have both a career and a family. The twins grew into young men who were as different as night and day despite their identical faces. Thomas wanted to be a rancher and bought land near the family property where he raised cattle. William became a teacher, dedicating himself to educating the children of Georgetown. By 1900, Xavier was 49 years old and Zelda was 48. They had stepped back from the daily operations of the restaurants, leaving them in the capable hands of their children, though they still consulted on major decisions and still helped out during busy times. They spent more time at the house on the land outside Georgetown, tending their garden, riding their horses, and enjoying the simple pleasures of a life well lived. They hosted Sunday dinners where all the children and grandchildren gathered, the house bursting with noise and laughter and love. On their 20th anniversary, Xavier and Zelda renewed their vows in the same church where they had first married. All 4 of their children were there, along with 6 grandchildren and most of Georgetown. It was a celebration not just of their marriage but of everything they had built together. That night, lying in bed in the house Xavier had built with his own hands, Zelda turned to him and said, "If I could go back and do it all over again, I would not change a single thing." "Not even the hard parts?" Xavier asked. "Especially not the hard parts. They made us who we are. They taught us what we are capable of." Xavier pulled her close, marveling as he always did at how perfectly she fit in his arms. "I never knew what home meant until I met you. I never knew what it felt like to belong somewhere to someone. You gave me that. You gave it to me too. Before you, I was just surviving, just working to fill the empty spaces in my life. You taught me that I could have more, that I deserved more. You made me believe in love again." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done every night for 20 years, and would do for all the years to come. The new century brought changes to Georgetown and to the West as a whole. The frontier days were ending, replaced by railroads and telegraph lines and automobiles. The wild, rough edges of the mining town smoothed out as civilization settled in. But through all these changes, Zelda's kitchen remained a constant, a place where people could come for good food and warm welcome. Xavier and Zelda aged gracefully, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines and wrinkles that spoke of years of laughter and hard work. But they remained as devoted to each other as they had been in those early days, still holding hands when they walked through town, still stealing kisses in the kitchen when they thought no one was looking. In 1905, they celebrated their silver anniversary with a party that lasted 3 days. People came from all over Colorado to honor them, former customers and employees, friends and family. The governor of Colorado sent a letter of congratulation, praising them for their contributions to the state's development. Xavier made a speech, standing in front of everyone with Zelda by his side. 25 years ago, I rode into Georgetown with nothing but the horse I was riding and the clothes on my back. I had no prospects, no plan, no hope for anything beyond maybe earning a meal. Then I met this woman who looked at me and saw something worth saving. She told me to stay and promised me everything if I did. I stayed, and she kept her promise in ways I never could have imagined. She gave me work, she gave me purpose, she gave me love, she gave me a life worth living. Everything I am, everything we have built together exists because Zelda Novak, now Zelda Kane, believed in me when no one else did. So tonight, I want to say in front of all of you what I have said to her 1,000 times in private. Thank you for asking me to stay. Thank you for giving me everything. I love you more than words can express, and I will spend whatever years I have left trying to give you back even a fraction of what you have given me. There was not a dry eye in the house when he finished. Zelda stood and kissed him, to the applause and cheers of everyone present. Then she made her own speech, talking about how Xavier had taken her dream of a restaurant and helped turn it into an empire, how he had been the best partner she could have asked for, how he had given her a family and a love story for the ages. I told him I would give him everything, Zelda said. But the truth is, he gave me everything. He gave me himself, and that was more than enough. As the party went on into the night, with music and dancing and more food than could possibly be eaten, Xavier and Zelda slipped away to the porch. They stood looking up at the stars, just as they had done that night they went to cut down the Christmas tree. 25 years, Xavier said, and I still fall more in love with you every day. Same here, Zelda replied. You are still the best decision I ever made. Even better than opening the restaurant. Especially better than opening the restaurant. The restaurant is bricks and mortar and food. What we have is something that will last beyond our lifetimes. Our children, our grandchildren, the love we have built, that is the real legacy. Xavier held her close, this woman who had saved his life in every way that mattered, and silently thanked whatever forces of fate or luck or divine providence had led him to Georgetown on that hot August day so many years ago. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren. The family tree grew and branched, but at its root were always Xavier and Zelda, the foundation upon which everything else was built. In 1910, on a crisp October morning when the aspens were turning gold, Xavier and Zelda rode out to their favorite spot in the forest. They were both in their late 50s now, but they still rode together whenever they could, still sought out the quiet places where they could be alone. They dismounted and stood looking out over the valley, Georgetown spread below them, smoke rising from chimneys, the restaurants visible on the main street. We did good, Xavier said. We did better than good. We did magnificent. I could not have done any of it without you. And I could not have done it without you. That is the whole point. We did it together. Xavier turned to face his wife, taking both her hands in his. If I had to do it all over again, if I had to choose between 100 different lives, I would choose this one every single time. I would choose you every single time. As would I, Zelda said, tears in her eyes. Every single time. They kissed there in the golden forest, surrounded by the mountains they loved, in the land they had made their home. It was the same kiss they had shared 1,000 times before, and yet it felt new, felt special, felt like the promise it had always been. A promise to love, to honor, to cherish. A promise to face whatever came together. A promise to build something lasting, something real. A promise kept from that first day when a cowboy rode into town with nothing, and a woman said, "Stay, and I will give you everything." And in the keeping of that promise, they had both received everything they could have hoped for and more. They had built a life, a family, a legacy. They had found in each other the home they had both been searching for. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and purple, Xavier and Zelda mounted their horses and rode back home. Back to the house Xavier had built, to the family they had created, to the life they had made together. Behind them, the forest stood silent and eternal, a witness to their love story. And ahead of them stretched whatever years remained, to be lived fully and joyfully, together until the very end. For they had learned the great truth that some people spend their whole lives searching for. That home is not a place, but a person. That everything you could ever need can be found in the love of the right partner. That sometimes the greatest fortune is not gold or silver, but the simple choice to stay when someone asks you to. Xavier had stayed, and Zelda had given him everything. But in truth, they had given everything to each other, and in that exchange they had found the kind of happiness that most people only dream of. Their story would be told for generations in Georgetown, the tale of the broke cowboy and the restaurant owner who built an empire on love and hard work and partnership. It would become legend, embellished and romanticized, but at its heart would always be a simple truth. Sometimes, when you have nothing, staying is the bravest and best thing you can do. Sometimes, offering someone everything when they have nothing is an act of faith that changes two lives forever. And sometimes, love is as simple as two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, building something beautiful from nothing. As Xavier and Zelda rode into the sunset, their silhouettes black against the golden sky, their story reached its perfect conclusion. Not an ending, but a fulfillment of everything they had promised each other on that first day and every day since. They had stayed, and they had given each other everything, and in doing so, they had lived a love story worthy of the ages.